Good evening and good morning to all of you. So welcome back for another week of our Ancient Path Modern Mind. Um, just before we begin, I'd like you to think about the hard work, or some of the stress and pressure at work that we've gone through. It's time for us to remind ourselves that we need to really take care of ourselves, um, and give us a little bit more time to reflect on the things we should do, that we shouldn't do, and clear our mind a little bit. Try to make the next 90 minutes a little bit of your time for you to absorb a little bit knowledge or wisdom from the Buddha that can help us, right? So make sure you sit comfortably on your chair and feel your body closely in touch with the chair. Your feet both rested firmly on the floor. Feel yourself in the environment, whether in the room, in the living room, in a quiet place. Feel your presence in the room with yourself. Please take a deep breath. Breath in, breath out. One more time. Breath in, breath out. Right? Thank you for paying attention. Now I'd like you to join your palms together and we recite, we pay homage to our teacher. We can recite together. Homage to the Supreme Teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha. Homage to the Supreme Teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha. Homage to the Supreme Teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha. You may relax your hand. Thank you. So, welcome back for another week. Today, we are going to continue with our talk on Chinese Buddhism. Of course, we are going a little bit more to the beginning of Chinese Buddhism in China. And the next session, the next half session, I'm going to explain to you a little bit of a part of the history of Chinese Buddhism, which I think is very interesting. Is a translation. Well, I mean, for most people, translation sounds boring, and dull, a lot of dictionary, a lot of words. But trust me, translation was one of the main reason I went to do my PhD in in Kyoto University, because I find that translating Chinese text is nothing like I imagined before. Of course, there are challenges, and the way we understand how our ancient masters, what kind of effort they put into it, what languages they learned, and how you really make the translation approachable to most audience. And this is itself like a culture itself. And there's so many interesting things that if we have chance, we can look a little deeper into that, and you'll find that there's so much wisdom in just translation itself. For me, it's like a practice, the patience. Sometimes when you discover some new things, it really make you very joyful on a way. Okay. So first of all, before we delve into the history part, I want to just spend a few minutes of talk about this is the question received after the class ended last session. Yeah, please allow me to just address to them. I think it might also be interested to most of us. This question goes like, okay, what are the merits of organ donation? Is it a higher rebirth? Okay, merits of organ donation. So, and then I skip part of it. Would organ donation hinder one's transgression? So, what are the merits of doing that, especially for someone who wants to overcome the cyclic existence? Is it really ideal to accumulate merits to go to higher spiritual realm that is not nirvana? Okay, this sounds a long question, but it seems to me the main point is about whether what is the Buddhist point of doing uh, like signing a paper, doing the organ donation? First of all, I want to stress that from the Buddhist point of view, we do really encourage Buddhists, yeah, all of us to do organ donation after, we know that at the moment we pass away and the body is no longer useful for us, but that is still useful for other people who might need our organ. So it said that what are the merits of organ donation? Is it higher rebirth? No, we don't specifically mention that. It's not an exchange, right? You do organ donation and then you'll be born in a higher realm. That's not the case. It's just an act of kindness. We know that we always try to do act of kindness when we're alive, even when the time we pass away, we still want to continue doing that. It's a very simple motivation. It's not about higher rebirth. Of course, you'll get married, and the marriage will help us in the future, whether it's to discover Buddha Dharma again or to have more resources when we need them to study Buddhism in the future, right? Would organ donation hinder one's transgression? Well, from the Buddhist point of view, it doesn't, right? I'm not sure. So I think the question may come from other Buddhist local religions that talk about, you should preserve the body as intact as possible for better rebirth, for better future world. But in Buddhism, that is not the question. It doesn't hinder your own, I would say, transgression to your future life. It doesn't. What are the merits of doing that? Of course, the as we said earlier, the merit for doing organ donation is not to wish for a higher spiritual realm. It's an act of kindness, right? So for us who want to practice to end our psychic existence, so the very act of letting go or letting go of our attachment to the body is the best way to show that, right? So I hope this um answer the question. And another part is it ash burial? Reference to the ceremony at Dharma Drum Mountain. Remember last week we mentioned about it is an ash burial. The answer is yes. We remember we mentioned about a Dharma Drum in Taiwan. We have a garden, and for the deceased people, we buried their ash in the garden itself. The garden is not huge, it's just a small piece of garden. But now he's already accumulated more than 5,000 people of doing that. So it is ash burial. Yeah, it's something that is being promoted by Sheng Yan Fa Shi at Dharma Drum. So definitely something that we should understand and think about. Okay, another bit more question. In Mahayana Buddhism, which Buddha is the most important? Amitabha, medicine? I don't know. You tell me. Which one is the most important to you? Right? For some people, if your wish is to be reborn in the pure land of Amitabha, of course Amitabha would be most important to you. And for some people who chant the mantra of medicine Buddha, right? Medicine Buddha, and of course you can understand about the pure land being built by medicine Buddha, and you can wish to be reborn in the land of medicine Buddha. So it's not a question about who is the most important, it's about who you feel you're related to. That's why Buddhism, I think, is very we always give options, you know. Like some people, they feel more related to Shakyamuni Buddha, then you pray, to come back and remain in this world. I mean, what we call samsara. samsara in this world that we are living in. The Buddha once say that this is my pure land, that this very world that we are living in is a pure land of Shakyamuni Buddha. And it was interesting that his disciple asked the Buddha, how come your pure land is so impure? How come there's so much suffering in your pure land? And the Buddha smiled and replied, okay, I can show you how my pure land really looks like. So what the Buddha did was he touched the ground with his forehand, and immediately everyone sees that, wow, our world is actually pure and it's like a heaven in itself. Everything was pure, and then there was no suffering, there was no difficulties. So the Buddha told him that, well, this is what I see the samsara is. The reason that we couldn't see it is because we are not ready. And when you clear our delusions and our suffering, you will see that this samsara is a pure land. So this very idea has actually contributed to many of the, what you call it, contemporary Buddhism, especially in Mahayana Buddhism. We call that engaged Buddhism. Engaged Buddhism, especially the one that being promoted by Fa Gushan in Taiwan. Sangye Faso once says that he wanted to create a pure land in this world itself, but not a distant world, but this world itself. How to do that? By changing our behavior, checking our, from the body, our language, and our mind. By purifying these three actions, we already in the pure land itself. So, coming to the question, which Buddha is the most important? It's up to us, right? Even this very pure land, even this very world itself can be our pure land, and the Buddha Shakyamuni will be your best teacher in this world. All right, and next one. How should a newbie decide and choose a lineage to follow? Theravada or Mahayana? Newbie. Well, are you a newbie here? Well, I would say, for me, for my experience, of course, I won't say that there is, I would compare what lineage is better than the other. We have Theravada, we have Mahayana, we have Vajrayana, which usually we refer them to as a Tibetan Buddhism. Well, Tibetan Buddhism is a representative of Vajrayana. Of course, we have for Bhutan as well, right? This is also Vajrayana Buddhism. So how do we choose? For my experience, I didn't choose. I mentioned once in a lecture before that I started learning Tibetan Buddhism because that was the Buddhism that was available to me at that time. Right? So my very beginning journey into Buddhism was learning about Tibetan Buddhism, learning some of the languages, learning some of the culture. I did that for a couple of years. And then when I went back to my home country in Malaysia, and I find and then I get exposed to another kind of Buddhism, which is a Chinese Mahayana Buddhism. So for me, it's not whether we decide which one to go, it's more like which one that appeal to us, right? So after years of studying, I come to an opinion that if you really want to choose, if you really have a choice to choose, I would prefer the type of Buddhism that is closely related to our own belief and closely related to our own culture, because then we don't need to study another language, or we don't need to get used to some of the cultures that we might think is a bit further from our own culture. For example, once I started to understand Chinese Mahayana Buddhism, I felt so much at home because of language, because of all the culture that we have in the temple is so much related into my daily life, right? So for me, I feel very comfortable, and I find it easier for me to understand the teachings using my own language. So this is, of course, in my own opinion, right? I'm not saying that you must follow Chinese Buddhism if you are Chinese, or you must follow Theravada, if you prefer meditation. I mean, it's completely up to us. And for me, it's just like whichever it is, and whatever you find most comfortable, that is the best for you. Okay? And of course, if our suffering are largely sensations or one of the other aggregates, what should we do to elevate them? Well, that is what training is all about. If you know that our suffering comes from, many come from sensations, for example, when we are talking with other people, when if we put too much emphasis on, let's say, emotions, right? When we hear somebody, the way people talk to us, the way people treat us, we have the reactions, emotional reactions. And if we are the type of personality that put too much emphasis on, I would say, sensations of how people treat us. So whenever we feel that, oh, this is a rude person, so he's not treated me well, that kind of thought arises, we will suffer because we feel that it doesn't match my expectation, right? So how do we elevate them? The best way is to remember that, well, sensations or emotion is only part of the five aggregates of one person and of ourselves, right? Of course, we have feelings, but we have other as well, right? We have thoughts, we have the body, and we have even our own imagination. So imagine that the sensation we have towards somebody now, that causes us a lot of suffering. Just remember that that is only one part of a story. There are also other parts, and try to put our focus on other parts of the person instead of just focusing on the faulty part that we think is causing us suffering. So this opens up our view, our mind, and make us more flexible, receptible. So this is how I think the practice of Buddhism can help us to reduce our suffering. What is meant by you must think for yourself? My understanding of Buddhism is to always think from others. Yes, I remember this sentence come from one of the sutta that we mentioned a few weeks ago. The Buddha say that we must think for yourself means that whatever the Buddha teaches, don't just take it as an authority. The Buddha never mentioned that he is authority. We must listen, and then we analyze, we think for ourselves, we apply the teaching. If that works, right? If that really reduces our suffering, then that is the right view. The Buddha tells that is the right view. So the Buddha said that you must think for yourself means that we don't take other people's word as authority, but we listen, we analyze, we apply them, then only we know that this is the right view. So this is what it means by you must think for yourself, right? It's not about being selfish. That is another story. So yeah, I hope this answered the question. All right, any other question? No? All right. So let's talk a little bit about history. Right, the coming of Buddhism. Well, we talk about the fundamental teachings of Buddhism in the very first class, and we also talk about how Mahayana Buddhism became what we have seen today. How did it arise? How did it begin? Especially now we focus on China, right? When was the first episode that Buddhism arrived in China? Was there any proof? Right. So I'm going to show you that this is one of the I'll say there are some legends that talk about how Buddhism actually arrived in China. And this is one of them. One of the most famous one is called the Emperor Ming Di, right? So he was in the first century of Common Era. So what happened was there was one night, Ming Di, right, the Emperor Ming, he dreamed about a golden man. The golden man was flying in the sky, right? So he dreamed about that. So he thought, wow, this is auspicious. This must be a sign, for us, for our people in the China. So what happened was he asked the servants around and just to ask what's the meaning of dreaming about this flying golden figure flying in the sky. So one of them actually mentioned to him, oh, you know, in the far away land that in the west, that's in India, there is a sage whose name is um, Buddha, right? The Buddha Shakyamuni. He said that he is a sage. He is a sage that is uh, being very much respected, and he has many followers. Like even though he has already passed away like 300 years ago, but he has a lot of followers and disciples, and everyone believe that he's a great sage in India. So our curiosity, so he sent a convoy to go to India and look for the teachings of the Buddha. So this is one of the story that talks about how the image of the Buddha actually first entered China is through a dream. You know, either you believe it or not, doesn't matter. It's one of the legends that we know about that talk that what they were showing in the sutra. So it says like this. In the Chinese, in the sutra, it says that 西方有神，明月佛，其形长，张六尺，和黄金色. You see, in the West, there's a saint, there's a sage, right? And the name is the Buddha. He's about 6. Zhang Liu. I don't know what is Zhang Liu. I don't know how many feet you call it. It should be very tall, right? Much taller than the average Chinese people are, I'm sure. And then his body is golden. So this is how it was described in the sutra, in the Chinese sutra. How the Mingdi, right, the Ming, the Emperor Ming started to know about about Buddhism. So what happened was he sent a convoy to the central India to look for the Buddha's teachings, and he brought back 2 monks, like 2 monastics. The name is Kashyapa Matanga, and Dhammaratna. These were the 2 first Indian monks who came to China. Well, these 2 names were recorded, right? Of course, we were not sure whether are they really the first one, you know. But of course, these are the 2 recorded ones. This is how we can be sure of. And what happened was when they came, they bring the most famous scripture. It's called the scripture in 42 sections. Because 42章经, yeah, scripture in 42 sections. We believe that in record, this is one of the earliest sutras being translated into Chinese. And because it came, according to the legend, it was carried by a white horse, right? So what happened was, in order to remember that, there was a capital in China at that time. So Mingdi, he built a temple called the White Horse Temple, right? But of course, when we study about it, and today's scholars, they always ask questions. They say, is it really true? You know, White Horse Temple, 白马寺, right? A White Horse Temple. They say, this is strange. Many scholars think this is strange. What is a white horse here, right? Because it says that it's really rare in China at that time, even in India, to relate a horse to Buddhism. In Buddhism, we seldom mention about horse. So why, a horse is being mentioned to name a temple? So one of the theory that they propose, one of the theory they propose is that, well, instead of 白马, right, could it be a transliteration of the Sanskrit word Padma? Padma means lotus, and lotus there are many temples in India with the name lotus in it. So they suggest that, well, 白马, is it a transliteration of Padma? Right? Padma sounds like 白马, right? So this, of course, this is a speculation. We have no proof, but this brings a very interesting point to us. When we do a translation from Sanskrit or Pali into Chinese, sometimes we come to some certain terms, especially very specific academic terms. The meaning is not clear in the Chinese. So without further resources to understand the original language, sometimes we try to interpret it from the very Chinese point of view. So some of them create a lot of trouble because in original language, the word just, let's say if this is true, right? Padma, it comes from the Sanskrit term Padma, but the Chinese heard about, oh, Baima, right? And you can imagine that, so the story started to develop, oh, because of Baima, and then the sutra came with a Baima. So this kind of theory started to develop, but originally it's just Padma, a lotus, that make the whole sense instead of creating more stories. So the point I want to make here is that once we study Chinese Buddhism more, and the more we read the sutra, we'll find a lot of examples of ambiguity in a Chinese term that we Chinese people, we try to interpret it from the Chinese point of view, from our culture, from our history point of view. And many, many times they were completely off. Right. So this is one of the things that I learned when I was studying in Japan with my professor, is that he always challenged me by asking me, how do you understand this term in Chinese? I'm like, well, I can break it up, this is what I understand from a Chinese term. And he said, actually, no, it's wrong. The original term just mean this in Sanskrit. But because in China, we try to interpret the terms, a lot of times from the teacher to the student, from the student to another student. So with like centuries of reinterpretation, some of the words in a sutra that we understand today, especially in Chinese translated text, might be off. So we might come to that, I will show you some examples later. That's why I find it very interesting. Interesting in terms that we might see, it might understand our text better with higher accuracy, and we understand the process of translation. Sometimes, actually a lot of times, actually they're going through a process of reinterpretation, and we try our best to go back to the original meaning so that we can understand it better. All right, so this is about a white horse temple, okay? So is it white horse or lotus? No one know for sure, right? Just remember that. Okay. And of course, the earliest reference to the White Horse Temple is only 3rd century that we find from the text. So remember that this is the 1st century, but the earliest record about the White Horse Temple is only happened after 200 years in 3rd century. So is it accurate enough to think that this is the proof for it to call White Horse 200 years ago? We don't know. Right? Nowadays, think about it. Even something that happened to our well, let's say to our grandfather, right? And then you heard a version from your father, and then you heard another version from your uncle. Even just one generation, the truth, they might have two truths about something that happened to the same person. Imagine after 200 years, right? What kind of story, what kind of legend will be added to it? So bear this in mind when we study Chinese Buddhism, because we have a history of development, and we try to understand this is the truth, and we learn everything with our best effort, right? To try to find what is the truth behind it. It's a very important principle that we have to bear in mind. Right? But this White Horse Temple became a very symbolic place because this is supposed to be the first time that an Indian text was being translated into Chinese, and this is a place, Baima Shi, right? According to our record. So it's very symbolic. So, of course, another symbolism is that because it was invited by the emperor, right? That shows what? Buddhism got royal support in the very beginning, right? That is also very significant. So is it really true? Was it true that Buddhism only started in China because of the emperor's invitation? Or is it already among the peasant people way before the emperor discovered Buddhism? Actually, there were theories that talk about that. before even like it was introduced to the court, the royal court, Buddhism was already among the peasant people. It's already in everyday life. So this is also possible, right? But just bear in mind that there are few possibility of understanding how Buddhism began in China. All right, this is the modern Baima Shi, right? This is still there. We can see that there are two horses, one on the left, one on the right. Of course, please don't climb on them, right? You shouldn't do that. Um, so the Baima Shi, yeah, this is a closer look of this Baima. Well, now we understand. Is it really the white horse that came to China, or is it a Padma? So next time you go to China, you visit this temple. It is in Sichuan. Sichuan, right? If you go there, oh, sorry, it's in Luoyang. Luoyang, right? If you go there and you visit this temple, think about what we learned today. Is it a white horse or is it a lotus? Okay, something that gonna make us think about. And this is also a very famous statue. It is displayed in Shanghai Museum from the Song Dynasty. Kashyapa, right? Kashyapa Matanga. Remember the name? He is one of the two monks who came to China. The very first two monks who came to China to spread Buddhism. So, well, I think, is it Indian look? Yeah, kind of, right? But it was crafted in Song Dynasty, right? It's about 900 years after what happened. So it's something that you can look if you go to the museum to understand the history of Buddhism. All right, good. Now talk about, okay, what is the evidence that show Buddhism arrived in China? What are the Buddhism? Well, the first thing is say that from the text, of course, record, we have the imperial edict that mentions that the worship of Yellow Emperor, Lao Tzu, right? Lao Tzu from the Daojia, Taoism, and the Buddha. So these three sage, we say we have the Yellow Emperor, the Huangdi, right? The earliest, we say the codified emperor in Chinese history. Yellow Emperor, and then we have the Lao Tzu, and then we have the Buddha. So in the imperial edict, which is in the first century on year 65, it already mentioned we should worship the Yellow Emperor, Lao Tzu, and the Buddha. The name the Buddha is already there. It's called Fu Tu. Right? In Chinese, called Fu Tu. It's already mentioned in the very first century. So this is the very best evidence that show that. And this year, especially on this year, is already well known in China, the royal court. So in the text, it also show that the Mingdi, right, the king Mingdi, he say that if someone has committed a crime and he wanted to ask for amnesty, what you can do is you can pay some ransom, pay some money, and then the money will be used for providing vegetarian feasts for monks and laity. It's interesting, right? The emperor would actually give this kind of order to people if you committed a crime, and then if you want to set free, come on, provide enough amount of silk and use that to provide vegetarian feasts for the monk and laity, and then you're free to go. So this is also recorded in the imperial edict last time. It's interesting. They show Buddhist influence was already there in the middle of the first century. So it also recorded that the Buddha was worshipped in the royal court alongside native deities. Native deities mean there are so many other local gods in China. So Buddha was already there in the first century. Okay. Of course, in the very beginning, the understanding of Buddhism was not easy for many Chinese people. It's a foreign culture. It's like a foreign god who just suddenly appear in our land. So how do we make sense of it? At the beginning, the Buddha was viewed as a deity teaching immortality. Why immortality? Because you know that at that time, the Chinese religion, the Han religion, was so much influenced by Taoism that the main goal of practice Taoism is become immortal, right? Your body, your mind become immortal. So at the beginning, when the foreign new religion came in, people were sort of thinking, oh, the Buddha teach the same? The Buddha teaches to be immortal, right? So people have this kind of expectation. So what do they do? Right? What do they do? So what the earliest Buddhists did was they make iconography, right, of the Buddha, which model on the Queen Mother, Si Wang Mu Niang Niang. There are many Chinese name of it. We call it sometimes you call Wang Mu Niang Niang, sometimes call Yao Chi Jing Mu, Jing Mu Yuan Jun, Si Ling Wang Mu. These are all the different names. If you go to the Chinese temple, you might see them. Wang Mu Niang Niang. Well, if you remember the very famous novel Si You Ji, right? So you remember when the Sun Wukong, how he actually went to the heaven and stole all the peach, right? You're supposed to only ripe the peach is only ripened after every 3,000 years. So and then there was at the right time, the Wang Mu Liang Liang, right? She was the wife of the Yu Wang Dadi, right? The highest god on the Chinese in the Chinese heaven. So she was preparing to have this feast after 3,000 years to prepare this peach. After you eat them, you're supposed to live a long life. And in the story, the Sun Wukong, right, the monkey, just went to the heaven and ate all the peach, and then there was one of the biggest trouble that he created. So there you appear, Wang Mu Niang Niang, right? So she is more like the wife of the Yu Huang Dadi. So it's interesting that in the beginning, the Buddha was depicted at least in the same level as the Wang Mu Niang Niang. Right. So we have evidence. If we go to a Le San, we call it one place called Le San Yamu. It's like a crafted kind of cave, and it was supposed to be in the late 2nd century. You can see the Buddha image, right? You can see the Buddha image actually placed like the Taoist quarters. We know that in this kind of tomb, because it actually was a tomb. In the main entrance, on the top of the main entrance, you will usually see the crafting of the Taoist goddess, right? Wang Mu Liang Liang is one of the most famous one. But in this place, they found that in place of the Wang Mu Liang Liang, they found the Buddha's sculpture. Isn't this interesting? Right? How Buddha was being placed to the highest god by the local people. So, of course, for the local people to understand Buddhism and to accept Buddhism, by telling people there's no self, is the last thing that we should do. So, in order to make people to accept Buddhism much easier, so they have tried to reinterpret, the understanding of rebirth to become like, oh, there is a soul that continue to rebirth. Because in the Chinese mind, after we die, right, you either become a ghost. I mean, all of us become ghosts in the Chinese belief. And I don't know why. When we die, we immediately become ghosts. So I think this is a very traditional Chinese belief. But in Buddhism, it's different. We talk about rebirth in a different realm. You might become a ghost, and it might become something else in other realms. So it's really hard for local people at that time to understand the meaning of rebirth, and also not to mention non-self. Right? People have no idea what it is. It's not in our culture. So many people misunderstood Buddhism to be a soul. Something that contain a soul that kind of being born again and again in the future. So initially, Buddhism was understood in this way. This is a rebirth. There's a soul that continue to be reborn in the future. But of course, we know this is not true. But anyhow, it was how Buddhism was depicted in a very early stage when Buddhism just arrived in China. So think about our environment, right? When we talk to non-Buddhists, especially people who are new to Buddhism, we talk about rebirth. You try to understand what typical, Chinese people would understand about rebirth. You think, oh, is it a ghost, right? A ghost become human again, right? So you can see that this understanding, this belief is so deep in our culture. Even now, we still see the effect. We still see the effect of it. Of course, this is our Buddhist point of view. For Taoism and Confucianism, this is how it is, right? Where we sort of understand how different perspective and not just um, grabbing on a view that, oh, only Buddhist is the best understanding, only we are the truth. So we try to be more open and see from other perspective as well. Okay, so this is one of the Queen Mother of the West. You see the Queen Mother of the West, she has two wings, right? This is the early depiction. And then she's always surrounded by a lot of mystified figures. Some of them are gods, some are semi-gods. So this is one of the what you call it, stone crafting that we see in a tomb, right? And in the placement in the tomb you just mentioned earlier, is in the Mahao, on the Mahao cliff. We see that instead of seeing this painting or this sculpture, we see the Buddha, right? There's an image of the Buddha with 30 cm wide, 40 cm high, seated in lotus posture, rendered with pronounced volume and adorned with a head hollow. So this is definitely a Buddha. So just imagine that during the Han period in the first century, so we already have the statue of the Buddha in China, right? More than 1800 years ago. So this is it. All right. In the early stage when Buddhism just arrived, so this is a brief history of how it began. So let's talk a little bit about the scripture in the 42 section, the 42章经, right? So this is a very early printing of the 42章经. This is in Chinese, right? It's really difficult to read. And in that picture, it says 竹汉竹法兰尊者. 竹法兰 is the name Dhammaratna, right? We should mention one of the two earliest monks who came to China. It's called 竹法兰, Dhammaratna, 竹法兰. So you can see it's a transliteration of the Indian name. So his picture is there. So what is this text about? Why is it being considered as the earliest translated text in Chinese? So we're going to take look a little bit into that. It's a legendary first scripture introduced into China. Okay, remember this name, the 42 sections, right? 42 sections. So what is it about? It is widely read in modern seminaries. It's true. I remember the first time I met my master. The first time I went to the Chinese Mahayana Buddhist temple. There was in a ceremony we were chanting this scripture in 42 sections, 42章经. The first time I looked, it's not too bad, Actually, if you read it, it's not too hard to understand, right? So it's very common. It's still very important, widely read, in most temples. So it's also a common authority in Chinese Buddhism because authority means that it represents a very early teachings of the Buddha. And that's why it has a sense of authority that most of the words that we believe are actually being said by the Buddha. So how does it look like? It has concise teachings and parables, right? Analects like dialogues. Why? What does it mean? It's similar to that of the Confucian classic, the analects, like the 论语, right? The teacher says something to the student and the student answer. So this text is interesting that it's about what the teacher said, and sometimes the student will kind of react to that. So if you read this text, you'll find that this is about conversation. It's so much similar to the Confucian classic, right? Think about it. Why is it so? Right? It's interesting. So it consists of dialogue between the Buddha and his disciples. So now the question is, why? If you read the Indian text, if you read the early Buddhist texts from India, well, very rare we have conversation, but of course some of them they concede concept, but most of them actually just a direct voice of the Buddha. You say this and da 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 da, and there's a long, short text or long text. But this text is interesting, is that it consists of dialogues between the Buddha and the students and the disciples. It so much resemble the Confucian classic, the Luan So this raised some interesting question by modern scholars who say that, so is it really an Indian text? Right? You see, people always doubt when you see something like this. Well, the format actually resembles the Chinese text in Luanyu. So can we trust that this is really, brought from India and then being translated into Chinese, but how come it resembles so much with the Luanyu? That really doesn't make sense. So anyway, it has been debated, and we will continue to talk about later. Just bear this in mind, yeah, whether this is really a true translation or not. So the core teaching of this text is like this. It's about ethics, right? Loving kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity, the four immeasurables, 四无量心, right? 慈悲喜舍, the four types of ethics. So this is how the text looks like. The Buddha says, should a man malign me and seek to do me harm, I counter with the four virtues of loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. The more he approaches me with malice, the more I reach out with kindness. The forces, the qi, right, of loving kindness, virtue lie always with harmful forces, and repeated misfortune will revert to the other. So it's kind of direct teachings, and he even uses the term forces, qi, right? The original term is qi. Well, this also quite sounds like a Chinese term to me, right? So if this is really a translation, why do we have this kind of term? Well, these are the questions raised by modern scholars to question whether this is really a translation or it is not as simple as a translation. All right. The next part is it talks about right view, the four elements, aggregates, and non-self. Like in the phrase 18, the Buddha says, abundantly complete the four primary elements that comprise the body. While each has a name, they are all devoid of self. The sense of an I emerges from the aggregate, but it is not long-lived and is really but an illusion. Okay, so the Buddha talks about the four elements that create the body, right? And then the five aggregates and then the non-self. So these are the teachings that you see that the Buddha says the word directly. This is, it's not real, just an illusion. The kind of closeness, the kind of direct voice of speech is quite different from the later translated text. Other than about renunciation, right? So this is what the text says. The Buddha says, riches and sex are to man what sweet honey on the blade of a knife is to a young child. Before he has fully enjoyed a single bite, he must suffer the pain of a cut tongue. Okay, this is about renunciation, right? Renounce from what? From the worry sensuality. It means that people chase after the pleasure of different senses or five senses. So this is a dangerous act. So this text also teaches us how to renounce our greed to chase after all these sensations, right? So how do we look at this text? Is it really a translation or is it not? So this is the latest some of the modern scholar consensus. It says that, well, we cannot say that this text is written in Chinese. The content itself show very clearly that they must be from India, right, or Central Asia, but it was compiled, right? So imagine this case: the two earliest Indian monks who came to China, and then they started to teach. Instead of having a book, right, the 42 sections, the scripture in front of them and start reading, they have different texts. And because they have to cater to the local Chinese audience, so they use their best ability to and the local understanding, based on local culture, to preach Buddhism to local people. That's why you will see terms like qi, right, in the text, which is not an idea in the Indian culture, right? The Indian culture talk about the chakra, but not the term qi. So the qi itself is actually very Chinese. So it's very possible that this is more like a teaching notes the two monks were giving to the public in China, and then it was compiled into what we call the scripture in 42 sections. Why 42? Why not like 49, 108? So it's more like the auspicious number in Buddhism. But in Buddhism, you never see 42. This is a kind of a strange number, right? So it just points to a possibility that these are just lecture notes, like being compiled from different sources, from Indian Buddhist texts, and then they give a lecture. It was recorded and then becoming in independent sutra, like what you call it, the text by the Buddha. So imagine if this is the case, right? If this is the case for this earliest text in China, so what happened to other texts as well, right? So what we understand about translation is not so simple. It's not as simple as, you have a Sanskrit text and then someone sit down and start translating and word to word. At the end, you have a Chinese text. Oh, this is from China. This is from India. This is definitely the word of the Buddha. It's not so simple, right? The route is always complicated. There's always some compilation. There's always some local interpretation by the translator. And there's always some adding and deduction of the contents and compression of the contents, elaboration of the contents. Is very complicated, but it's very interesting to show that how Buddhism become localized, right? We have to have this understanding about how the scripture become what we see today. So this is a very good example. Now, most modern scholars, they all agree that, the 42章经, right? The scripture in 42 sections, then it didn't come from a single text in India, but it's a compilation of different texts, which was given as a lecture to Chinese people in the Han Dynasty. Okay, is it clear? Yeah. Well, I'm not saying that this is like the truth itself. This is like speculation, but this is one of the best speculation so far. Right? Most people agree. Of course, you can find more evidence to prove it the otherwise. So this is not a direct translation from a single original text. Okay. Bear this in mind. This is how we should view the text as well in the future. Okay. Okay. Now talking about translation, this is why we're going to the final section of today is about a translation. Why translation mattered? Why is it so important in Chinese Buddhism? Because in China, the primary medium of learning is by reading, right? It's by reading. And because most people who are literate in China, they especially who are related to the royal courts and to the well-known family, learning by reading is one of the most effective way. So translation in this case is very important as compared to remember just 200 years ago in India, no texts were being written, right? All texts were being transmitted orally. So they were memorized and being transmitted from a teacher to a student to the grand student, generation by generation. But this doesn't happen in China. In China, we much rely on reading and on printed or on written on the paper. So when this happens, translation become more important. People will read, but they don't read Sanskrit, of course, and then they have to read our own language, which is Chinese. So this is why translation become one of the biggest events, especially when it came to the Tang Dynasty. Right, the government, right, the government will spend a lot of money. Sometimes they want to maintain a translation. We call it a translation team. Some of the team become as big as a few hundred people, few hundred monks sitting together translating text. Imagine how big the skill was. Just one huge or several huge temples, and the government sponsored few hundreds, even thousands of monks gathered there full time just to do translation. Right. So this is how we should appreciate what we learn in Chinese text today came from the effort of the people from the Sui dynasty, Tang dynasty, and in those few centuries. So because we are in China, we are exposed to a wide range of texts. Jataka. Jataka is about the previous life of the Buddha, right? There are a lot of interesting stories. You can read it. You can read it called the Jataka. And then we have meditation manuals. We have the Prajna Paramita. Sunyata is about the highest truth, which is everything is lack of self, right? So from Jataka, which is a story of the Buddha, to meditation manuals, to understand swing of emptiness, is the wide range of studies, right? But the problem is, right, most ancient Chinese Buddhist translator or masters, they believe that every Chinese text that came into China, they were treated as the word of the Buddha. So everything that came from India with the Sanskrit text on it, they all believe that these are all real Buddha's words. All right. So this created a big problem. Right. Remember that in India during that period, Buddhism has already developed, right, from an early Theravada tradition, the early Buddhism tradition, and then we started to have Mahayana, and then we also have like almost 20 different schools of Buddhism, which kind of a little bit different from one another. Imagine all these texts coming to China at the same time. Theravada, Mahayana, you know. So what are we going to do with that? Do we have enough knowledge to differentiate them, which is earlier, which is later? Actually, no. At that time, we have no idea. We just think everything was the Buddha's word, right? So this created another very, I would say, concentrated scholastic work. They call it doctrinal classification, right? Well, what is doctrinal classification? Okay, let's look at the next page. This is in Chinese. I'm sorry. But the meaning is we call panjiao. That means the classification of all the Chinese texts, right? So in China, in the very beginning, we kind of separate them into 5 categories, right? We call that the Xiaochengjiao, well, the Hinayana, it's called the very early Buddhism. In China, we call them, at that time, we call Xiaochengjiao, right? Xiaochengjiao, they have different areas. They have the self and the Dharma, they are all real. And the second one is Fa You Wo Wu. The Dharma is real, but the self, is not real. Fa Wu Qu Lai Zhong. And then go on. So they separate them according to their philosophies, right? And this is only referring to the early Buddhism. And then we come to Mahayana, right? We had the beginning of the Mahayana. Everything is empty, the emptiness, right? And then we have the final Mahayana Buddhism, 真的不空, right? And the final Mahayana tend to say that not everything is empty. At least your Buddhahood is not empty, right? So it maintains the Buddha is not empty. We call it the Four Xing. And then we have the Mahayana Dunjiao and Yuanjiao, right? Dunjiao that means that, well, you don't need to learn all these philosophies, you just have to see the truth at this moment and you are enlightened. So this is how in the Tang Dynasty, the scholars and the monks, we try to classify all the Buddhist texts that came in randomly from Central Asia, from India, along the Silk Road, some by the Silk Road, and some by sea. So all that coming in at the same time. So we have to categorize them, make sense of them, which one is an earlier teaching, which one is a later teaching. So if you study Chinese Buddhism, you will find that these categories play a very important role for us to understand, what I'm reading now belong to this category. And the next text is belong to this category. Okay, so this is very important, right, for Chinese Buddhism. All right, because as we say, we are exposed to a wide range of Buddhist literature. So from early Buddhist to Mahayana, everything was mixed up. People try to make sense of what's going on, what's happening, how come some teachings have, against each other. Some say that this is real. No. Some say that this is empty. This is not real. So what's going on? We need to make sense of it. So this is a very important characteristic of Chinese Buddhism. We try to blend everything and make sense of the whole thing, right? All the Buddhist teaching that came in from different periods. So that's why we have something called a creation of doctrinal classification. What is doctrinal classification? It is a hierarchical ordering of the doctrines from a very surface level beginning and then slowly going to a deeper and deeper level. Right. So this is the idea of doctrinal classification, a very important sections in Chinese Buddhism. Okay. Right. Who are the translators? So these are the people that we owe them so much. This is a picture, it's I find it online. Usually they refer to this is Xuan Zhang, right? Xuan Zhang, Venerable Xuan Zhang, who went to India in Tang Dynasty, who brought back, I think, more than 1,000 scrolls of Indian texts, and then he started translating them. So Xuan Zhang is one of the best representative. Of course, there are a few more. For example, most of them come from Central Asia, India, right? It's interesting that how we know where they come from. You can see it from a name. They use the first character of the country for which they came as a surname. For example, we have someone called Kang Senghui. If you go back today and you go to look at our Chinese Tripitaka, you see this name, Kang Senghui. Who is it, Kang Senghui? The Kang actually comes from a country at that time called Sogdia. In today's is Uzbekistan, right? Came from Central Asia. Kang actually refers to the country called Sogdia. That's why when you see Kang Senghui, Senghui is a name, and the surname refers to where he comes from. Right? It's very interesting to know this. And also we have An Shigao, most of the, I think he's in the 2nd century, one of the most famous translator in China, An Shigao. So what is An? Right? An actually refers to Iran, Parthia at that time. In China, we call it An Xiguo, right? So An becomes his surname. The Shigao, who comes from Iran, who come from Parthia at that time, right? Who else? We have Zhilou Jiacheng, right? And where he come from? Zhixin stand for Scythia. It's a southern Russia and western Kazakhstan. It's a little country in the middle of Central Asia. So Zhi also refers to the place. And also with Zhu Falan, Zhu, of course, refer to India, right? India at that time in China, we call it Zhu. Tianzhu. Tianzhu means India. So Zhu Falan, his name actually is Falan. Right? And then the Zhu means that he came from India. And then an interesting thing is, during the 4th century, we have a very famous monk, a Chinese monk, who think about our surname too. So all the monks who came from India, they have like a very unique surname. So how about us, in China, who have chose to become a monk? Should we have the same surname? Yes. Starting from him, we all have the same surname, Shi, right? That's why I call myself Shi Youmin. Youmin is my ordained name, but Shi becomes my new surname. So imagine this tradition actually started in the 4th century by Dao An, right? So if you if you go to see anyone with the name Shi, well, I think it's almost certain that they are from the same family from the Chinese Mahayana Buddhism. Okay, this is a map about the connection between China with Xi'an, Dunhuang, Xizhou, and this part all the way to the Central Asia. Anxi Guo is Iran, Kucha is the north it's in Khotan. So these places, the Central Asia actually is initially where many Indian monks who went all the way to China to start doing the translation. Okay. So about translation, okay, this is a fun part. How was a text being translated into Chinese, right? The text can be translated from written text or recited from memory. You imagine there are two Indian monks who came from India. Some of them might be carrying some text, some of them not. They come empty-handed. So what happened was, because in India monastics were trained to memorize all the texts, as many as possible. Some of them can memorize 10,000 lines without effort. If you don't believe me, you go to Thailand or you go to Sri Lanka, and then you go to the monastic, you go to monastery, and you see some very young monks. Some of them are even children, right? They do recitation every day. They memorize the text, and they can memorize so much. So this tradition is still carried on, in the Theravada tradition. Imagine 1,500 years ago, those monks from India, how much they can remember. So the translation text we see today, some of them are from written text. They actually bring the leaf with them, right? With the Sanskrit text written on them. And some of them actually just came from their mouth. They just recite, and then people will help them listen, and then we write down everything and then translate. So these are the two main sources of the text. So it was a teamwork, right? It was never work alone. First, we have a foreign monk from India who came and read the text. It was, let's say, he was sitting in the middle or standing in the middle, and then he start reading. If no text, he would just recite all the whole text from the beginning, one word at a time. This is how it started. And then there was a person who understood the language, write it down. So we need to have someone who understands both languages, the Sanskrit and the Chinese. So we need a person to do the intermediate. You just write it down. And then one person translated into Chinese, from the Sanskrit into Chinese. And then one person polish it, right? And then finally, the finished translation will be read back to the foreign monk for verification. Okay, so these are the five category of work that was involved in the translation process. It's very rough. Of course, within these five categories, you can split down to more. Imagine there's one translation center in Tang Dynasty, few hundred monks working together in these five categories. How huge is it, right? So let's say this is one of the palm leaf. This is still found in Japan. It's considered to be the oldest known Sanskrit text, or the Heart Sutra, which is written down, on a piece of paper. This is part of the Heart Sutra. I think there are two pieces left in the Tokyo National Museum. It is in the, I'm not sure whether this is Sanskrit text. It looks like a Sanskrit text to me. Yeah, it's a Theravada. I mean, it's Sanskrit for sure, but the type of writing, I think it looks Sanskrit to me, or another Khotan language. Anyway, so imagine when Xuanzang, right, came back from China, he brought with him rows and rows of text like this. Maybe it looks like this, yeah. And then when he came back to China, he has to show to the disciple, okay, guys, today we're going to start translating this into Chinese. What are they going to do, right? He was the only one who knew Sanskrit and Chinese. So who's going to help him? Well, you can imagine how hard it was in the beginning, right? It would take years to train them to understand both languages. So that's why he need to have the patronage from the government. Like he had a very good relationship with the government, with the emperor. That's why he got a lot of sponsorship, and he have like hundreds of disciples helping him and learning Sanskrit at the same time and doing translation at the same time. Okay, let's go a little bit detail into the translation process. Okay, let's say the Heart Sutra, right? Let's say from this script alone, okay, and then we start to write down one line at a time. So this is the first time that I write down. Right? Oh, this is in Tera. This is in what? Devanagari. This is a text written. It's a Sanskrit text written in one of the alphabets from India. So you can start reading. You say Vyava Lokayati Sma, right? Pancha Skandas, then Hamscha. Okay, let's show you this. Well, okay, let's make it easier, right? I can write it in Roman letters. Vyava Lokayati Sma, and then there's a full stop. Pancha Skandas Tams Cha Sabhawa Sunyan Pashati Sma. All right. From the original Devanagari text, when the Chinese hear it, they need to make the sound. Of course, in Chinese text, in the Chinese translation, they need to use Chinese character as alphabet to write down the sound. But today I'm going to show you in English. That's why I use Roman letters to show you how it will sound like. Right? Okay, what happened now is now we know that this is how it is, right? The Sanskrit original text. The next thing they do is they need to divide them. They need to know what is a noun, what is a verb, where is a pronoun, where is a proverb, and everything. So they need to know where is one word, what is one sentence, how to break them apart. Because in Sanskrit text, it's always like jumbled up, it's like the ancient Chinese text. There's no comma. Usually just one long chain of words, it might become a complete sentence. So you need to know where to break them. So today when we learn Sanskrit, we always use Roman letters in the beginning, and then we can see how individual letters show up. Here, the first word, okay, Vyava Lokayati Sma, is actually is a full sentence, right? That's why I write them in blue. It means, okay, have I shown you? Okay, the first in blue, it means he examined. All right. So if I know Sanskrit, the first thing I do is I translate word by word. The first part is Vyava Lokayati Sma. Okay, it means he examined. All right. And Pancha, I know Pancha is 5, right? And then the next word is what? Skandas. Okay, Skandas. Okay, let's leave for the moment. I don't know how to translate it. Let's say they keep it Skandas, right? And Tams mean they are, right? And Cha means and. Swabhava Sunyam means self-empty. Pashati Sma means he saw. Okay, this is the first stage, translation word to word according to the Sanskrit grammar, right? Word to word. So now if you read the whole sentence, he examined 5 skandhas, they are, and self-empty, he saw. Well, that doesn't make sense, right? It's just randomly translating the words. So the next one, we need to polish the translation. You need to actually make it more like a Chinese sentence. Now the next thing is he rearranged the words, right? Make it more Chinese-like. He said, he examined the 5 skandhas and saw that they are all self-empty. So this is the 4th stage, right? To make it more Chinese-like, to polish it. And you think that, this is good enough, right? They make sense to the Chinese. No, but not yet, right? What is self-empty, right? It's not easy for Chinese people to understand it. So we might need to further simplify the translation. Become like this. He examined the 5 skandhas and saw that they are all empty in nature. Instead of self-empty, we say empty in nature. Okay, so the original Chinese become 照见五蕴皆空, right? This is in the Heart Sutra. It's in the very first part of the Heart Sutra. 观自在菩萨 心生般若波罗蜜多时，照见五蕴皆空. Now we know the term 照见五蕴皆空 actually come from this Sanskrit. Vyavalokayati sma pancha skandastamscha sabhavan shunyan pashati sma. This is 照见五蕴皆空. So how beautiful it is, Chinese translation with a long chain of Sanskrit terms, word. Now, 玄奘 just use 6 letters. 照见五蕴皆空. Isn't it beautiful? Right? So this is why I always emphasize that when we read the Chinese text, it's always very concise. Right? It's always very compact. And we need to know how to break the words. If we don't have the resource of the Indian original text, we might misinterpret. Right? 照 and 见. Say, well, 照 and 见, is it one word or 2 words? Some people say, oh, 照见 is one term, right? One verb. 照见, But actually, if you look at the original Sanskrit, we have the examine and the saw. So actually, examine and saw, these are 2 different ideas, 2 different actions. That's why 照 and 见 came from 2 different verbs in Sanskrit. First, you need to examine. After examine, then only you can see clearly. So this is what I mean by 照见. Right? So the meaning is become more accurate, if we could go back to the original Sanskrit instead of just relying on the Chinese text. This is why translation is so important. This is why for us to understand Chinese, if we can, right, read the Chinese. If you can, read other texts that can tell you that, oh, this is how it is originally. Even though the term originality, you might ask another question, are you sure this is the original one? Because the history has been more than 1,000 years. Of course, there are some mistakes here and there, So, but this is why we need to do research and study on it. And I remember when I first went to Kyoto University, when I first started to learn how to translate, it was very troublesome. We were reading the text. The text we were reading was in Tibetan language. So the funny thing is, the first thing my professor asked me to do is, if you want to understand the Tibetan text, first find out whether they are translation in Chinese, right? And whether the original Sanskrit is still available. If they do, by all means, you have to get all 3 printed out, list in front of you, and find the sentence, match them word by word. That's a must, right? Okay, let's say the text I'm reading, we have, even though I was reading Tibetan, we have the Sanskrit, and then we have the Chinese translation. They came from different era, but they all refer to the same thing. So I have to get the 3 prepared. Okay, it's not just that. The next thing you have to do is you have to understand, okay, in the past century, which famous scholars have done a translation? Either it is in French, either it is in it could be in Deutsch German, right? French, German, in English, either modern Chinese. We need to dig it out. All the modern translation. What for? We need to compare. Right, we need to find out how these scholars understand the 3 texts. So I remember that the first class I went in, professor was discussing only just one line, right? And then we have some difficulties in understanding the Tibetan meaning. So we had to refer back to the Chinese and refer to the Sanskrit. Still, something doesn't make sense. Then we had to refer to the modern translation, who was done by very famous scholars like Frau Warner, Steinkellner, right, from Europe, who were very famous scholars in studying texts, the Indian text and the Chinese text. So we have to see, we have to refer to them, how they interpret this line. So at the end, for the whole 90 minutes, we were just discussing one sentence. Right? At the end, I just had one sentence being translated, and that was the whole class, 90 minutes. But during that whole class, we went from Tibetan to Sanskrit to Chinese to French to German to English. back to Chinese. The journey was, I think the whole point was the journey itself, how we try to understand how each word means by not taking for granted. Since we know Chinese or English, we just follow the meaning on the surface. So this is a whole, I would call the spirit behind the translation. Be accurate, be consistent, be faithful to the meaning. And it can take a long time to understand translation, but thanks to all our ancient masters who have done all this very tedious job of translation. So here we are today. We have a whole collection of the Chinese sutras. This is the Zhonghua Da Zhang Jing. It's one of the most comprehensive collection of the Chinese translated text. It's more than 100 volumes. So thanks to all the channel, we have all of this. We believe that most of them translated from original text, right? So we understand from today's class is how do we understand the Chinese text, right? Some of them are translation from one original text. Some of them are translated from a sermons given by foreign monk, right? And some of them are compiled from a few original texts, and some of them are actually written by Chinese masters. And all being grouped together under this Zhonghua Da Zhang Jing, right? Nowadays, this is one of the collection one of a very comprehensive collection, but it's not the only one. We have other collection like Da Zhang Jing, like Da Zheng Zhang from Japan, and Pi Lu Zhang, from ancient China as well. There are at least 9 or 10 whole sets of Tripitaka that we need to refer to find one text. Anyway, I just want to let you know that what is the world of translation, what it means to us, just to give you a little bit of feeling of the history of development and to appreciate more of how much hard work our ancient masters have done to help us to be able to read the text as we can see today. Okay, I think that's all. I'm going to stop here and I will pass my time to Sharon.
Sifu, are you going to take any questions tonight?
Yeah, I think we have a few minutes, don't we?
Okay. Right. The first one is, according to Huayan Jing, organ donations a very high level of 布施, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. Huayan Jing, actually, the audience of the Huayan Jing was given by the Buddha was actually the Bodhisattva. Bodhisattva are more like a sage, more like a saint. So for them to give away their body is one of the highest level of donation. Definitely. That's why it's encouraged.
Okay. And another question, which English translation of the Sutra of 42 chapters are considered the most widely accepted for practice purposes?
English translation? Okay. Well, I'll have to check on that. So if you like to, I can send the link. I can try to search for the name for you. The best English translation? Okay. Give me some time. I can look up for that.
Okay, and the last one, what does 法身 and 达摩 fit in?
Okay. Perfect. Okay, I didn't mention Fa Xian, right? Fa Xian is a 4th century Chinese monk who was considered one of the, is earlier than Xuan Zhang. Xuan Zhang went to India in the 7th century. Fa Xian went there in 4th century, 300 years earlier than Xuan Zhang. So he brought back a lot of texts from India as well. He did translation as well, but not as many as Xuan Zhang. Yeah, he was one of the pioneer, very important. He went there in the 4th century. That's why the texts is brought back actually are a little bit different from the text that brought back by Xuan Zhang by a difference of 300 years. You can see the text actually has a life itself. The texts were being written and copied from generation to generation, even in India. So what happened was, by a gap of few hundred years, some of the content might have changed. Some of the words might have just misspelled or placed. So Faxian also plays a very important in Chinese translation. And Damo doesn't translate, right? Damo 祖师, he was one of the very first, I would call it Chan, Zen, in Japan they call it Zen monk from India. We believe that he was the first one who brought the lineage of meditation directly transmitted from the Buddha all the way to him, and then he was the one who brought to China. So he wasn't a translator, but he is a lineage. He brought the lineage of meditation from India to China. Okay, that's who they are.
That's all the questions for tonight.
Okay, thank you all for your patience and for your attention. All right, so definitely if you have more questions, we can find time, or you can send it, you can write it down on the chat box, and Sharon will help us to compile them. So anyway, I would like to take the last few minutes to help us to gather ourselves, to try to reflect on what we have shared today among all other friends and all our practitioners, the good time we share together by paying attention, by making notes, hoping that with sharing the Dharma, we will bring more wisdom and peace to the world, to ourselves, to our surroundings. And we hope that by learning in this way, we are able to let the Dharma fall deep into our mind and help us to be able to practice them in daily life and to help ourselves, to help other people to overcome obstacles. So maybe dedicate whatever merit we have accumulated today for the benefit of our own practice, for the benefit of the people around us, for the benefit of our society, our country, and the whole world. May there be no more natural disasters that bring suffering to all sentient beings. May there be no more hatred. May there be no more wars among countries, among races, among different people. May there be more peace, and may there be more hope among all human beings with the nature. And last but not least, may we take a little bit of time to come back to ourselves, to know that we have performed wholesome deeds today, we have dedicated our merit, and really remember the very purpose of practicing, of learning, is for the benefit of all living beings. May you be safe. May you be free from mental suffering. May you be free from physical suffering. May you be at ease and be at ease. Thank you for joining us tonight. Hope you have a good evening. And for those from North America, may you have a good day, just like myself. We're going to continue. We go back to work today, right? Well, we have a long day to go. Okay. Good night, everyone. Thank you. And we'll see you again next week.